Hey guys, and welcome to the Tabletop Alliance.
Hello everybody.
This past week we were lucky enough to get to have a little play with the brand new Citadel contrast paints.
Yes, it was all thanks to Jake at Firestorm Games for letting us come down and have a little gander as he used them on some models.
Yeah, we thought it would be a little bit different, I guess, to use them through an airbrush rather than just painting them on, the normal way. So Jake is going to kind of show you what he used and how he used it on a different range of models to try and show you how to get the best out of them through an airbrush. Of course, if you want to pick up any of these paints or any other stuff for your hobby crafting, then you can get them through Firestorm Games. Check out the link in the description down below.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. We may as well just jump into the video.
Yes, let's do it.
Games Workshop has described this new contrast paint release as a way to help you keep creating incredible armies and jaw-dropping models. Citadel Color are massively expanding the contrast range, improving the range of amazing shade paints, and creating the smoothest and brightest ever white spray. The best just got better. But the question is, have they really done this, or are they just blowing smoke? Well, let's see what we found out from our quick experience with them. Now, it is important to point out that everything we are testing today is through an airbrush, so the results you see here may differ to using these paints with a normal brush. The airbrush being used is a simple Neo, meaning it is a fairly entry-level tool, with no special tricks or anything to make the job appear better or worse. We've tried to be as honest and realistic with our tests as possible. For some of these paints you will need to shake them a lot. Some will require adding mixing balls to make sure the paint does not separate and turn into an unusable mess too, whereas others will just mix nicely with little effort. It depends from paint to paint. One improvement that is worth pointing out though is that with these new releases, the paints seem to be more consistent, whereas previously you could have had a bit of variation in the same colour throughout certain batches. So before even spraying, that is surely a step in the right direction. But now on to what you are here to see, some of the select paints themselves. We didn't have time to go through and use every single one of them, but we tried to select a nice variety of colours and vibrancy to hopefully give you a good spread. Now remember, it's probably wise to use small amounts of airbrush thinner when using these, just to get the right consistency for an airbrush. But now we are ready, let us get spraying. So first let us look at a mix of Sigvold Burgundy and Doomfire Magenta. We have primed these using a zenithal highlight to create darker areas for the shadows and lighter areas for the light. And with that, we will apply the burgundy to begin. We aim to get as even a spread as possible. Then, with that having had time to dry, we will now add the magenta too. This paint appears brighter when first applied than it does when it has dried, so please bear that in mind. And also on a side note here, remember when using an airbrush that the pinks and reds are paints you need to make sure you clean properly out of your airbrush, or you risk tinting everything you do later on. These paints are the most vibrant, but the brighter the red colour is, the more of a pain that it can be. Now we have seen how that looks once it's dried, let's move on to a green. Here we have Karandras Green, with this being applied first, then with the striking Scorpion Green applied afterwards. This striking Scorpion Green is a very bright green. It will surely be the one that grabs the eye when you're on the battlefield. Some people are absolutely going to love this, or maybe just hate it. It really depends on your style. But what is good to see from this example though is how both sides look like a different miniature with the different shades on it. By applying with an airbrush, the transition that it does create means that this works beautifully. As well as this, you can also see an example when having used the Croxagore Scales paint as well, instead of the Karandras Green, because this gives you another look at a different end product that you can create. And now sticking with the green for a bit longer, this time let us look at our Endless spell, with this one having been given an undershade using Luxian Purple first. From here we add the Karandras Green, starting with the underside, with that being the part that we want darker. Just from this, you can see the end look when having it over purple versus over just the white. A very clear darker to light spread. It will be a smoother transition on shade with an airbrush of course, compared to that of a hand brush. Then we return to the striking Scorpion Green to cover the remaining bits. And also on a side note, Jake had deliberately left white on the skull at the bottom for more of a glow effect too, so you can see that. with him then adding around the edges for that nice glow edging as well. So, when looking at this end product, you can see the changes from the purple undershade into darker green, into lighter green, and then into and over the white. Here in classic Art Attack style from back in the day, here is one Jake made earlier, and it gives you another example of using this exact same method and same paints on a larger scale shipwreck miniature, again just to give you more of an idea. Now I think we should move on to some Heresy Beaky Marines. We will go through a few colours here, then compare them together later. We will start with a colour we've already seen as an undershade, but now I think we should look at how it really stands on its own 2 feet. For our example, we have applied the Luxian Purple onto a silver base coated marine. This is again one of those paints that looks very wet when first applied, but do not fear as it will look fine once it has dried. Next we have another metallic based marine being covered in Peroxygor Scales, which in my opinion is just a stunning colour, and I do feel like many people will agree with me there. This is one of those that is an incredible colour on its own, but still, it will also be a great base for other colours too. You can see how well it goes on in just a single coat. Moving on, this marine is being covered in Imperial Fist Yellow. This is another of the set that people appear to be very excited about, with it being a lovely happy yellow. Yellows and light colours in general can be a real pain for good coverage, but this one does look promising, making it much easier and quicker to paint your Imperial Fists. This marine we are given the darker treatment to with the application of Garrakax Sewer. Yet again this is one that looks quite wet when first applied, meaning it almost appears black initially, but once it dries it does end up a nice brown colour, or as nice of a brown colour that you can get with the name Sewer. But either way, still a good paint. This final marine for today is being covered by the super high pigmented Bal Red. Due to the higher pigment levels of this paint, we would recommend having at least 2 mixing balls in it to keep everything together and mixed well. And no real surprise here, it does cover very well. And in terms of shooting on the day that we did this one last for a good reason. And that was, like I mentioned before, the staining of red paints in the airbrush. So it is good to end with this kind of colour where possible. Pretty much everything we've seen so far though has been positive, so I think we need to look at least one example of where these paints do not work so well for our tests, and that one we are choosing the Pilar Glacier colour. Now straight away, I'm not saying this is a bad paint. This one is more designed to be brushed on, after all it is meant to tint the miniature, so when used through an airbrush it is, well, rubbish. And well, that is what we got. We didn't get to go through the entire range of every single colour, but it gives you a rough idea of how these paints will come across and finish when being used through an airbrush. So what can we really gather from our brief experiences with them? Whether you are looking to paint your models to be parade ready or simply just battle ready, they can do a great job for both. These paints make battle ready very easy now. With a fair amount of them, one layer with some small touch-ups, and then you're just there. You are battle ready straight away. A simple evening or weekend and you could potentially have a whole warband ready to play with. Remember though, this video is focusing on using it with an airbrush. However, that does not mean that you have to use an airbrush with these paints. They work great with an airbrush or a normal brush too. In fact, some work better with the normal brush, like we just showed. That is just one of the great things about them. If you do know how to use and maintain the airbrush, they are an amazing tool, and they can really help you step up your painting game. So, maybe a video on how to maintain an airbrush in the future might be a good tip video for you all. Let me know in the comments below if that is something you would like to see. A big question though that people have when looking at these new contrast paints is, how are they compared to the last range? And well, generally they seem to be pretty well received. These new ones do have different properties, with several of the new ones having more specific uses. You also get some that are there to be far more translucent and very weak, meaning that they are basically more of a filter. This paint will sink into the recesses, tinting them to the right colour, but it will not affect much of the rest of the model in the same way. In the right circumstances, they can be great, but in the wrong, they can be completely useless. And that seems to be how these new releases are. Beautiful and vibrant when put in the right places with the correct application, but they will fall flat if not used correctly. And on a side note here, just to end, I would like to bring up a point that Jake from Firestorm raised when demonstrating for us. He had made a point about how people complain that using an airbrush can waste a lot of paint, and how many people see that as a big downside to using them. But remember, as much as you think you need to be precious over your paint, maybe just try thinking of it this way. You've just spent God knows how much money on a miniature, likely £50 and upwards for many of them. You spent a couple of pounds on a pot of paint. You do not need to be precious with it. At the end of the day, it is the painted model you will have after all of those hours that you put in, and you will never remember about losing those small amounts from a paint pot. You will remember the job that you are proud of if you're not being too precious over it. You care much more about what you finished with than what you've got left over. Now, some people may or may not agree with me in general, but I felt like that was a good way of thinking. And with that, I would like to now know from all of you, how do you feel about these contrast paints? Will you be picking them up, or do you have no interest in them at all? Do you think they are a good release by Games Workshop, or just an attempt at a money grab? I'd love to know all of your thoughts and opinions on this in the comment section below. Also, please let us know what you think about this kind of video. We would love to make more on future releases if these are the kind of things that you enjoy watching. And so with that, a massive shout out to Jake from Firestorm Games again for helping us out with today's video, and remember to check out our link for Firestorm in the description below for all of your gaming and hobby needs. And so, we will see you next time on the Tabletop Alliance. Goodbye guys.